welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Very delighted to be here today. As Laurent said, my name is Isolde Bromeyer. I'm a curator. I'm a professor of photo imaging and emerging media at NYU, and also a cultural strategist, so working with organizations and companies to figure out how they can kind of leverage and navigate culture in meaningful, authentic, and artist-centered ways. Very excited today to be joined by Ralph Nauta, who is an artist, designer, and co-founder of Studio Drift, and Troy Simmons, who is a Miami-based artist. And I love the fact that we have someone local here on today's panel. So I guess it's actually less a panel and more of a kind of casual conversation about this notion of artist as a disruptor. And I'm going to put that, I won't do the kind of funny finger signal, but I am going to put disruptor in quotes because I feel like it's a heavily used term, and I kind of feel like at this point, aren't we all sort of disrupting, been there, done that, and sort of what's next? I think that is a little bit of the kind of flavor of where I'd love to go today. We have gathered two wonderful forward-thinking artists today to really share their thoughts on the ways in which artists are working across mediums and spaces, both physically and digitally, to create work that's really experienced, perceived, and presented in new ways. And this also means, and I think something that's very important to me as a curator, that your work is engaging with a very broad range of audiences. And so I'd really also like to center some of our conversation on that topic. And, you know, really think about the question of whether or not we really can sort of frame, kind of frame this as disruption, or is this really both representative of the present and the future of art making, of presentation and engagement. So I thought, let's start off, and maybe Ralph, you want to kick us off with sharing a little bit about your work and sort of how you define your practice with regards to this topic, right? The idea that you're working in kind of a different way outside of the kind of isolation of a studio solely, and that you're working kind of beyond the four walls of the studio across different platforms. Maybe talk a bit about your work in relationship to that.
Sure. So, yeah, I think it all starts, at the beginning. How we started our practice in general was more not coming from the art world or the design world, or not even really knowing what this all was, but going to this amazing academy in Eindhoven where. At that time, I just walked in and I thought, wow, this building is so inspiring. The people here are just inventing the coolest stuff I've ever seen. I want to be part of this. And, meeting my partner the first day, Lonneke, we started to have these conversations about our childhood interests and the difference between them. As I'm kind of a sci-fi geek and she's very into natural processes. And I think, to be honest, I was just trying to get with her, but so I was trying to make an impression, and so I was trying to find the similarities between nature and sci-fi. And then during this conversation, we actually found out that there's a lot of overlap in the two, and we just started, putting these interests together and create the work, what it was. So we never thought about, like these boxes or like where does it belong in. And because this education was called the Design Academy, what I think is just a very good art academy in general, we got pressed into this box of being contemporary designers. And in the beginning, it was all fine, and we ran with it. And then you get like all these opportunities, you meet these amazing galleries and beautiful people that you can work with. And then, like at a certain point, we felt, okay, but why is our work here and I see what's happening over there? Why is there such a weird barrier between the two? So I guess we started working hard to make the relationships with the art world, also to open up that dialogue between the contemporary design field and contemporary art field. But for me, there are a lot of similarities, and they're equally as interesting and as important. So we just started thinking, okay, who are the players in that field that we can work with? Who are the tastemakers? And we just worked that, and now we're working with space there in the art field and with carpenters here. So in that sense, we open those boundaries. Does that kind of answer your question?
No, it really does. And I think it sounds like, and I know for Troy as well, your whole entire practice is predicated on kind of traversing boundaries, right? I mean, that's really kind of, in a way, the ethos upon which it was founded. But then you're also working in these kind of interstitial spaces. I mean, I think these boundaries still exist. Ironically, we're sitting here at Art Design Miami, and we look across tomorrow, Art Basel opens. And I think that we'll see some work here that we see over there, but I think what we're talking about a lot today, I think this is top of mind, are artists that actually don't think in terms of boxes. They don't see a box, not even just thinking outside one, but they're also not interested in kind of the siloed effect, right, of their practice. Troy, for you, you're someone that's drawing, I mean, you're trained as an architect. I mean, you have an architectural background. You're clearly very interested in materials and materiality. So your training, by its very nature, and then in terms of how it manifests in your work, I think speaks to a lot of this kind of overlap and merging and borrowing back and forth. Can you talk a little bit about your practice and also how you see yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, architecture was kind of like something that happened as an afterthought, honestly, because in the beginning, I was kind of like drawn into this world from really looking at my mother's nursing books, looking at biology, looking at the cellular system buildup, looking at all those different things, and kind of being inspired by that droplet of water, like under a microscope, that was something you couldn't like see with your naked eye, but yet still there was a whole world of something underneath it. And so as a kid, I was kind of looking at these books and like, what is this, and being really infatuated with all that stuff. And it drew me into school. Art, architecture, none of that was part of it because I thought biology was my way to go. So I ended up going into school and studying environmental science and worked as a lab technician for a water treatment company for a few years and decided that was like something that wasn't as creative as I really wanted it to be. In the background of me going to work at this as a lab technician, for the water company, I was creating artwork from a plant that I found called Brachemia scandens. So it was my environment and what was around me that was inspiring me and bringing me in. So the whole, the world of art that we see it as today wasn't something I even had on my radar. To give you a little more background, I'm from Texas, a little town called Palestine, Texas. And it's a little small town between Louisiana border and Dallas, Texas. And Louisiana border and Dallas, Texas. So that's where all my family was. We didn't have any inkling of thinking about art. We were just surviving basically. And here I was as a kid getting involved with biology and my parents telling me, hey, go be a doctor, get into that field. So long story short, my curiosity drew me into being more into the world of what the environment was putting onto this built environment around me we couldn't see, and therefore pushed me into getting into the built world as we are as humans are dealing with it. So that's when I ended up leaving and going from the architectural world and the art world, or from me being an artist in the background and jumping into architecture. So architecture for me was kind of like, what else do you do? An artist is not an option. Biology, the environmental science field, was a little bit more it wasn't as creative as I wanted it to be. So the medium point was architecture. So that's how architecture worked for me. But then there was things that really held me back from the architectural world that limited my my creativity. So my art world was it was me in the background creating art that was satisfying my architectural dreams and wants, and it all morphed itself into where I am today as an artist that's kind of creating works that are architecturally driven and also driven by nature also. So I don't know if that answered it either. I'm kind of
well, lucky for the two of you, there's no one right answer here. So
there we go.
No, but I think that's really helpful just in terms of thinking about also the sort of different modes of presentation that we're seeing today. So Ralph, one of the first times I saw your work was several years ago at the Armory show, and that was you and Lonica had created this incredible cube that appeared as if it was sort of floating in midair, and people found it quite perplexing. And I saw many visitors, returning to it over and over again to kind of figure out how this massive, almost steel-like cube could be floating in air. I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about how the presentation of work has changed. So we've moved out of the gallery, we've moved out of museums, many of us in terms of artists, but also I think even myself as a curator, and thinking about other canvases, for lack of a better term, other contexts. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the kind of less traditional modes of presentation in which your work has been shown and engaged? And then maybe also touch on, because I know technology is such an integral part of your thinking and your practice.
Sure. So, yeah, well, that concrete block, like floating in that space. That was an interesting moment, especially because at a certain point in that presentation was actually flying outside of the booth, just towards the people, and that was also the moment that
Do you want to describe for our audience?
Oh
who
yeah,
hasn't
so it's
seen,
like
just
this
very briefly.
floating block of concrete from 4 by 2 by 2 meters that we can control and turn over all its axles. It's actually flying. I'm not going to tell you how it works because that's the whole idea of the work. You know, that you come in and you start contemplating about how the technology behind it can drive something like this, and that especially in relationship to our everyday objects. For example, we get into our cars every day, and most people don't have no idea how a combustion engine works, but they're still bored in life. What I find very fascinating and weird, because if you're open-minded and you want to just take in all the beauty that's been created in this world, then stuff like that. I mean, you can even, like on one combustion engine from a certain car, you can freak out for weeks, like months. So how can you be bored? So that was actually what that piece was about. Like, and I want people to lay in their beds at night and think like, how does that work? And if I would tell them how it would work, they'd be like, okay, and then they never think about it again. So. Yeah, so taking work out of context from that, normal gallery booth, I think is very important. And we've been so lucky that we could do a couple of pieces at Burning Man. This was very interesting, and I thought at the beginning kind of tricky because, in the art world that wouldn't be considered like, and of course, I have to sometimes be strategic and think about these things, like where do you place your work, who's going to see it, how are they going to interpret it. So I thought Burning Man might not be the right place because, there's so many, uncurated works that I actually love because it's like this fully self-expression of people just coming out, and it doesn't matter what background you have or what you do, you're just going to create something cool for the sake of creation. And then I thought, okay, like screw it, we're going to do it anyway because I find like the environment it's so fascinating. I find the engagement with the crowd is just the right kind of mindset, that people are completely open and willing to experience something, taking the time for it. So it's like, let's do it. And then it just worked out amazing. And now you even see like the whole Burning Man community coming to Art Basel and trying to engage with this art world and breaking open these boundaries. What is very important. Otherwise, we just get stuck in this stigma of working a specific way, and I mean that's boring as hell. So yeah, we need to work on that.
No, great, thank you. I want to come back to the Burning Man, of course, but also just the idea of audience as well, because I think that's a lot of what you're touching on when you kind of move beyond what we think of as sort of traditional spaces for presenting work. And I don't feel like it's that new of a concept. I mean, I feel like now artists for the last decade have been kind of moving into spaces to present work, to draw inspiration, and to engage with people that are maybe a little less expected. But so I do want to go back to that point around audience. Troy, for you, even in thinking about your work, I've seen some two-dimensional, I've seen some very sort of sculptural, kind of architectural work that you've created, and I imagine also that you have presented your work in a range of different contexts. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your practice and sort of how you think about new opportunities or ideas for presentation or platforms for presenting your work.
Yeah, currently I'm working on a project with Jessica Goldman and the Goldman Group. They're here in Miami, in Wynwood, and I think it's incorporating sculptural and artistic works into actual facades of buildings. is something that I'm actually involved with now. We're shortlisted with a project with Norwegian Cruise Lines, which they're also incorporating Tony Craig and a few other big name artists that are being incorporated into venues that are a little outside of the realm of gallery or our museum spaces. So it's another opportunity for people to engage with the arts and also get involved with seeing the works and becoming interested in the art in other venues that are a little more natural and a little more like on vacation and you see some artwork. It just kind of like brings people into being more curious about what the works are. With my work again, incorporating it into different facades, different facilities, and bringing the just a passerby an opportunity of seeing some work that's engaged and really like, while look at the building, but yet it's still an artist that's like done a piece of work that's incorporated into it. It makes a big difference with my work.
So let's loop back to this point about audience, because I'm wondering, and maybe it doesn't resonate with you, but I'm wondering for each of you as artists, how much, if at all, do you consider audience and sort of the engagement of your work as you're creating, right? There's a sort of firm belief, I think, on the part of many of us curators. We know artists make work to be seen, to be engaged with. You don't create work to sort of shove in the back of a storage facility. So with that obviously being top of mind for us as curators who work with you to kind of create a platform that honors your artistic vision, how much do you think about audience? I mean, Ralph, you just mentioned, kind of taking it out of the white cube and showing it at Burning Man, and that there was a bit of trepidation initially, right? Because you weren't quite sure. I thought this was interesting, how the so-called art world would perceive it. And I'm wondering, does that kind of factor into thinking, or have you sort of moved beyond that? Because as we sort of started the discussion, we know that sort of these boundaries, right, have already been traversed and in so many ways blurred. So you can talk a little bit about that, audience.
Sure. Yeah, so I kind of force myself not to think about these things. Obviously, they pop in one's mind, but I think the most important thing that I can do as a creator is make something that inspires myself. So I never make compromises with Lonneke in what the work should be or how it should be perceived. But I just know if it captures my interest and holds it long enough, then I know it will be good. Because, well, I mean, I'm busy with these processes and this kind of work that we're making. I mean, it's my interest, my life. So I hope that I have equal, at least, or more knowledge about these subjects than the people that look at my work. So if I can capture my own engagement, then I hope in that sense I can educate the people to engage with it. So yeah, I just think that's very important. Never to compromise to the public or the people that you show your work to, because if you make a compromise, you're always screwed. I mean, it won't be very interesting.
But I think it's interesting to think about, rather than considering audience or sort of people's engagement as a compromise, maybe thinking, so for example, your work, you use a lot of technology, right? Whether it's machine learning or other elements. And it seems to me in your practice that you are interested in how people interact with your work, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, the cube, or maybe it was a different iteration, actually responds to people's sort of movement, right, and engagement with the physical piece. Is this correct?
Sorry, I lost the question.
No, I was just thinking.
I thought it was very interesting that you said machine learning and not AI, because a lot of people make that mistake. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
But can you repeat?
I'm somewhat savvy on the tech front, still learning. But no, I guess what I'm asking is, so especially with your work, I feel like there's technology and the way in which you and Lonneke experiment with technology is so integral, right, to your thinking. I presume. So I'm wondering if, when you create some of these works that are actually designed to engage and respond to your audience, then audience has to be top of mind in a way for you. And it's less about it's less about catering, but it's more about maybe thinking about what are the various points of entry for different people who are viewing the work. Like, how might they engage with it, and how might we construct something with a particular technology? I don't know. I was just kind of throwing it out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is important for us to show the poetry and the positive natural sides of what technology can be. I think that's also like one of our main missions is to establish a relationship with these global large-scale companies that might just use technology to make their next billion instead of like connecting society in a more sustainable way. So that is important. But that said, it just kind of goes automatic. I mean, we just create what we create for ourselves. This is what I want to see. This is what I want to work on. It's like, when I was a kid, I was just deconstructing my Beetle and putting it back together again. Like we literally made a work about that. It's just like, yeah, my fascinating, and I just want to share that with other people, and hopefully then they engage with that. But
Great.
does that answer your
no,
question?
that touches on it. I mean, I really wanted to kind of think about that give and take between an artist's practice, their work, but then also kind of who is engaging with and viewing the work. So for Troy, thinking about your work, I mean, I was really struck when I was looking at some of your bodies of work with your use of materials, and some of which are everyday and some of which are paint and what we think of as artistic materials, but the way in which you are kind of appropriating materials in a different way, in which we would maybe not necessarily think of, with regards to art. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit maybe, especially about kind of the materiality, and then maybe kind of segue a bit into how you may or may not consider audience and sort of the importance of audience.
Yeah, so with my work, I really incorporate everyday material, some found material. Particularly with this project that we're working on, it really, here in Wynwood, it's a community that's being gentrified, but it's being gentrified in a way that's more thoughtful. And I say that because the Goldman Group, that's the way they're doing it. They're still engaging like what the community was beforehand. And so with my work in particular, I use construction material, concrete, rebar, everything that's included in when you decide to build a home or build a building. I'm using all that stuff in my everyday practice. And so that when it's integrating there into the building that's going on, particularly here in Wynwood, it's infused with the explosion of color. And when I moved to Miami about 12 years ago, I really was impressed by or taken in by how many different cultures and how many different like groups of people who are all here in the city living together, like within one spot, one space. And so that in mind, a lot of my work kind of moved into that realm of I express the cultures by color. So I infused a lot of different like multicolored parts and pieces. When you see my work, you'll see it's really colorful, and it's like transversed by a concrete facade, basically. So I can say I can engage the public, by really looking at this situation or the things that we're encountering here in the United States right now with, a lot of like people moving back into the cities and displacing some of the people who live in those neighborhoods and shifting them out or pricing them out. And the works are really that explosion or that unveiling of what was before and then what's happening now. And so when I mix in the color and all the different lines and the straightforward things that are there, that's like really to push back to think about what the neighborhoods were like before it went into the state to have to be or to lead into revitalization or for someone to be taken back over. So it's my works, it engages the public. I think about the audience, and it really goes from what I'm experiencing at the time and where I am in my own personal life and where I'm heading and where I've been. So I take it as my practice is more of a reflection of things that I've experienced in life and things I'm experiencing now and things that are to come. So technology-wise, AI and different things that, forgive me if I say the wrong words for you here, but I mean, I'm researching all those different things because, we have to think about it. 2035, I think they're like saying we're going to be infused with like computers, like where we're going to basically think something and what our iPhone or our phones we would text and look up. it would come to our minds. So all of that, all those different things that are happening and all the different things that are coming up and going on within our lifespan, I'm taking that in and like packaging it and kind of moving it into something to express it in an artistic way. And so, yeah, my materials, to put that back out there, my material is just an experience and exploration of things I've done from a kid up until now. Concrete is just something I'm into it now, and I'm pleasing myself with concrete, and it's just one of those things that I'm working on at this exact moment. So materials mean a lot, and also I think the audience, they mean a lot, but it's my interpretation of what's going on, and then I put that out there to the audience to show them what I'm thinking about at that particular time.
Great. So I'm really glad that you brought up technology again, and I'm wondering if, and maybe Ralph, I'll start with you, since this discussion is around disruption, and I don't know whether or not we've cleared up whether we've been disrupting or that's something that's been going on for a long time. I happen to think that sort of everything comes and goes in sort of evolutions, which can be seen as disruption. But just thinking a bit about technology in the future, I'm wondering, Ralph, if you could share, well, maybe two things. Number one, if there was a shift in kind of how art is made or how art is perceived or how art is sort of defined, if there were a shift to be made, I wonder what you think that shift could be or might be or should be. And then I guess this sort of puts us more into thinking about the future. I want to ask you about maybe, and I don't know if you can let the cat out of the bag, but ask you a little bit about maybe one or two of the ideas that you're thinking about or some of your interests for the future as you and Launica kind of work and create. So what shift? Is there a shift or a change that you either see or would like to see as we move forward, particularly in this space of artists that are straddling multiple realms and working with different mediums?
Well, yeah, I think if you look in history, this so-called change, and I do prefer the word evolution because it's just this ongoing process of, just people reacting to their surroundings and influencing each other, and I think that's just it's a natural flow, I guess, like what you say, and I find it very hard to pinpoint a moment in time and say, okay, maybe this is the moment it changed. I do think a lot changed because of social media and the fast-paced information that we need to process in our daily lives. I think that had a major influence on not always positive in how into depth we can go about certain topics, but it also broadens the spectrum. So yeah, I think we're still adapting to that curve and how to manage that, and I do see a positive trend as well. I see a lot of people kind of turning off their Instagram or being less busy with it. I mean, maybe it's also now because they block the likes that you can't see the likes anymore. I don't know. Like it's just an evolution. I don't think I can pinpoint this time and space. I mean, I can tell you what changed, like our perception in that, in what we could achieve, and that was for me. I think it was definitely Burning Man. Like when we got this project going on that we've been working on for 12 years, and also the role of an artist that like a large corporation as Intel that we work with that art piece, opened up to this conversation of being able to work with an artist to make the piece relate to humanity more than what they were previously thinking. I mean, they were doing they were going to do large logos in the sky and stuff like that, and we had to convince them, okay, but what if we do this art piece and maybe it becomes more valuable over time in the relationship to the time that it's in, this art piece, compared to doing this logo and doing the next logo, and everybody gets bored. Like, that was a very interesting time, and for us it made a big change. Yep. And now we see more relationship to these large-scale companies, these CEOs that we can have a dialogue with, that we find very interesting, because I want to be surrounded by people that are changing the world, that are thinking about what are the next steps of humanity, and obviously these people are you know, they're doing this. So I just want to be smack in the middle of that. So.
Always nice to be smack in the middle of something happening. And I think actually, Ralph, in a way, you're pinpointing a moment or an opportunity to connect humanity to technology, right? I think for so many of us outside of these bubbles here, right, that we're sitting in right here in Miami, for so many, technology is this thing. Machine learning is this thing. But the connection between me as a human being and that thing, hasn't quite, the connective tissue maybe hasn't quite been developed. So I think that's one point that I think you're pinpointing where I actually see your work really intervening in. And then I think, the other thing is really kind of offering people opportunities to think about how can technology be useful? And I'm not talking about social media and Instagram, but how can it be useful? How can it help us see ourselves and exist in new ways and sort of do things differently, right? And you're seeing that a lot around conversations with the way in which artists are kind of interrogating and looking at the social implications of technology, or the way in which creatives and designers are looking at design and technology and sustainability. So I think it's maybe less pinpointing a moment, but I think you really are kind of, sort of framing for us a little bit of this time that we're in where there are some really interesting opportunities to intervene.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I summed it up very nicely. That's what a moderator does. Troy, maybe a little, so I love that you were saying, as someone that's working with these sort of, and forgive me if this isn't how you define your work, but sort of more static, still materials, right? Like paint and concrete and, metal. And now you're exploring technology in a range of different forms. And I'm wondering if you can kind of, maybe there's an opportunity there that you're sort of interested in, or if you can kind of take us a little bit through your thinking about the future, maybe just specifically of your work. I mean, how do you see your work maybe coming together with technology? And maybe it hasn't fully congealed yet, but give us a little hint.
It's still evolving in that realm, because it's, again, I'm taking on things that I'm becoming interested in. And I guess I'm leaning into a lot of what's happening in the United States right now. So my work is kind of like focusing on some of that, and also delving into those issues, and kind of not really say stagnant in it or focused in that, but because it's something that's it's really, I guess, close to me, being from the South.
Yep.
And also my wife just recently moved to Richmond, Virginia. So coming from Miami, going to Richmond, Virginia, family still living in Texas, a lot of my works are still really digging deep into my roots. So as far as evolution of incorporating my own thoughts and my own ideas as far as technology and moving forward, they're there, but I'm also having to slowly project myself into those things. My work is the progress of something that I've been doing all my life. I mean, I take it in and I reflect on it. It's something that I realized that what I was into at one point may have been something that was gelling within me that I didn't know about until maybe 5 to 10 years later. So therefore, what I'm experiencing right now is something that's going to evolve into my work and show it later, I would say, in my practice. So, my work is something I take it in, I dig deep into it. I don't really, I'm not doing it for a purpose to really I'm doing it to really satisfy myself, I would say. So I take it all in, and then I produce it out. When it comes out, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, I don't know. So as far as technology, it's something that I'm really interested in, but I'm still working on works that are have a meaning that's coming out right now. So the works I'm producing are things that I've thought of and really been with me throughout the past 4 or 5, 6 years up until this point. So I'm not to say it's behind, but it's coming and evolving into a tangible thing to see and to put out into the audience.
Yeah, sort of grounded in the present with an eye on the future.
Exactly.
And I would say, Ralph, your work is grounded in the present with a big foot in the future. Safe to say?
I like that, yeah.
Okay. You can pay me later.
Sure.
I think on that note, I'd love to open it up to any comments, questions from the audience. And we have a passed mic in the back. So is there anyone with something, a question, a comment? Great.
How does technology affect the way that you create your artwork compared to maybe how you might have made it 5 years ago to 10 years ago?
Who you're asking? Huh?
Both of you guys, you want to take that?
Yeah. When I was also thinking about the previous question, and it lines up with your question. So also this moment in time when things started to change, like it was when technology became more accessible and became more like a paint for artists instead of being this, untouchable entity that you couldn't work with. Like programming has become more easy. Like back in the day, we used to make our own microcontrollers like from scratch and cost a lot of money and energy. And now you can just buy an Arduino board for 15 euros and start working with it. So there's that changed a lot. And now I forgot our question.
She asked really like, how does technology, how might you describe the way in which technology either has or hasn't impacted your work now versus say 10 years ago? I mean, I'm not going to date myself, but
yeah, it didn't impact so much that the ideas were the same, but now they become feasible. Some ideas that we had were not possible. But for example, with Franchise Freedom, the drone artwork was 13 years ago. We just were looking for a carrier of this light to fly our swarming algorithms. But we came up with drones, but there was no DJI. There were no companies creating this hardware. So you have to start from scratch. Whereby now you think of something and then you're like, oh, that tech exists. And then you can reach out to this company and maybe start this collaboration. So these processes are much faster. And sometimes it's also frustrating. I mean, you see like the new kids on the block come up and they just like, bam, made something happen that you had in your mind for 10 years. And you're like, damn it, I just missed that opportunity.
It makes it easier, I would say. I physically like to put my hands in it. So working with concrete and working with all these like materials that I work with, I like the weight of it. I like the tactility of like taking a hammer and banging the concrete up after I've created it. And so technology-wise, I mean, I guess it, I'll go back and forth between different programs in the computer, and almost like from an architectural standpoint, like dealing with computer programs and renderings and different things to kind of see exactly where I would like for it to go, but then actually picking the piece up and physically throwing it on the ground, and then it takes me in another direction. So it becomes an exploration as I'm creating for myself and also for the audience. So I would say technology, in a way, it makes it easier. Actually, when I myself getting into some of the works that I'm doing, I try to think about how the future of CNCs and printers and all that, how can I get around that? So it makes it I see a machine that can do something, but I want to think about how can I beat that machine? How can I do something that would be so outrageously expensive for a machine to do, or so outrageously complicated for a machine to do? How can I take that, do it myself, and beat that machine? And so then the works become something that we're in now, where it's hard for my work to be implemented into public works because we have to take it somewhere, and someone physically has to have 30 people creating the works as opposed to a machine being able to do it. So
you're going to lose that battle at some point.
I know I'm going to lose, hey, but it's an exciting thing that I'm going through right now. So it's one of those things that I'm fighting with, and I'm having a good time doing it. And I am thinking for the future, though. So I'm thinking about those things how I can use that computer, use that machine to help the work also. But what I do, if you put your eyes on my works, it's exciting, and also you put your eyes on it, and you tell me how that machine could beat it. And I'd appreciate that, in good numbers.
Yeah, let's have a coffee, man.
And feasible. Yeah. Let's do that.
I think this is, I would say, as a curator who works both with inside institutions and then in, very unusual public spaces, I think it's a question that artists, and I'm glad Constance asked that, a question that artists really have to contend with, right? When you do a video installation, at the Whitney, is it, or at, Palais de Tokyo, is it enough to just install a 3-channel video, or does it now need to be fully immersive? Does it now need to be interactive? I mean, these are, questions, not to say that artists, again, to use your language, Ralph, have to cater to that, but they do come up when you install something, right? Is that the effect that I'm going for? Will it, could I amplify the work or the message or just the visuals of the work by upping the ante on technology? So I think these are conversations that artists are having. I know I'm having them with artists as a curator, and I think they're only going to continue and expand. Did we have any other questions or comments? Yes, here we have a question.
Yeah, hi. So in terms, going back to the idea of disruption and, the implications that disruption has in terms of extending space or breaking the idea of boundaries, what is disruption when it comes to the idea of medium or material? I was wondering if we could unpick that a bit more, because it's pretty clear to me how disruption exists in terms of going beyond the white cube, attracting different audiences, being ephemeral as an art form, but I'm not clear on material and medium and how that is actually translated into disruptive art practices.
So are you talking about, say, for example, when you say, just to repeat, did everyone hear the question? This notion of disruption as it relates to material and medium. So just to give an example, are you talking about moving from like a 3-dimensional work into space, or what?
I think we kind of started getting into that through the use of technology and how technology changes art. But I was just wondering, from your perspectives, both of you as artists, especially Troy, you were talking about how your work is architecturally and nature-driven. So, when we think of disruption in terms of space, where land meets water, where the built environment meets the natural environment, where there's no boundary, where things get broken, I was just wondering, how can we look at that in terms of material as well? I mean, I'm sure there are obvious answers, but I was just thinking in a personal way.
I think it's more like just using, if I hit this right, using non-traditional materials or things that you wouldn't think of as being a material to bring into a practice to be able to manipulate in a way that we usually wouldn't see it, or to transform that material in a way that's not traditionally what it wasn't made for, into something that can be used as a voice. I experiment personally with my own works with a lot of different materials. It's not noticeable. A lot of my works, if you look at the works, there's a lot of underlayment, a lot of things underneath that are like experimental that I've actually put into the work to create the flow in which the works are going. The paints that I use, that's a unrestricted material that I personally put together, playing around with no art background, not knowing what the rules were in that regard, but coming from a environmental science background, which we deal with a lot of chemistry. So I experimented with different products, different chemicals that come from, say, the automotive industry, coming from the industry of the art world, also just things that I may found at Home Depot, and seeing what happens. If it doesn't explode, then that material creates something that works. And if it doesn't if it doesn't create a toxic film that kills everybody in the building, everything's good. So yeah, I experiment with a lot of different materials and a lot of different things that kind of create something that may satisfy the idea that I'm trying to reach towards. So the works, again, concrete is the only thing that you see in my work that is just something that's traditional. And I do that on purpose. So if you see the concrete, it's exactly the same thing you walk on, the same thing you live under. It's the same thing you see in everyday life. Everything else is just experiments that's been going on to see how they're going to be volatile, or if they're going to stay until, if they're going to survive today, and they're still here, so we're okay. So, going to some of the project, some of the works that I'm doing for public works, obviously we have to bring that back in to satisfy building codes, to satisfy all the rules that we do have, OSHA, so you know, my exterior, my works that are public are more so typical materials because of all the regulations and rules. But as far as like what's in my studio, it's an experiment in there. So.
Yeah, I love the that how a lot of people think that concrete is a natural material, and they think, like, for example, that steel is man-made, you know, but they're completely the opposite. So these conversations for us also very important. We also that's why we also made this floating block of concrete, because it refers to the idea of, you know, working with sci-fi authors, how they think when you have this book like Utopia from Thomas More, like 1516, and it's like this the Middle Ages, and this genius is subscribing this material that you can build like 3-story high buildings with open structures that the wind can go through, and he's actually describing concrete. And then scientists start developing kind of like what you're doing, just experimenting and just putting stuff together, and then, you know, making new materials, because, you know, they read about this idea, and suddenly it's like the foundation of our society 200 years later. So well, even more, but it was invented 200 years later. So then you have that. So that's also why I love sci-fi. You know, it's just like these mind-blowing ideas, and then you have like technicians and scientists freaking out over what this can be, and how this will influence our society. Yeah, it's interesting.
The realm of possibility. I think we have time for one more question? No? All right, well, I would like to thank very much Ralph and Troy for joining us for this conversation, and thank all of you for coming out today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talks on the schedule today and Design Miami. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.